Hello, and welcome to the Eugene Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Vince Casey. This is the first podcast devoted entirely to the Eugene real estate market, where every month we bring on local experts to discuss current trends to help us navigate the ever-changing landscape that is real estate. The Eugene Real Estate Podcast is now sponsored by House to Home Construction. House to Home Construction. Love where you live. This month's guest is Dan Gandee. Dan leads the Operative Group with his business partner, Ed Zulovic. He is also an active investor and partner in Sharks Holdings and West Coast Property Group. Dan also co-hosts a national podcast for agents called Real Estate versus Technology. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vince.
Yeah, absolutely. I've loved our little chats, and I'm excited to pick your brain here today. One of the reasons I asked Dan on is his mind is just a steel trap for real estate information. A lot of agents can focus on one market or one aspect of the market, but Dan, however, is just able to talk fluently about the Portland market or the Eugene market, California or Oregon, whatever it is. It seems like he's got a bit of information on it, and it's always really relevant to the game. So we're all going to be benefactors of hearing him talk today. So Dan, you're our first guest for 2024, and we just had Chief Economist Matthew Gardner on to give his predictions for the new year. As a team leader and as a busy agent, where do you think we're going to land this year?
I think the market is in a very interesting spot because sellers who want to sell and either move up or move down are watching their equity, and buyers who thought they could buy this year or want to buy this year are still dealing with those record high interest rates. So when you combine those two things, you have not a lot of inventory and you have not a lot of buyers that are ready to go like they have been over the last couple of years. So I think there's still a lot of tug of war between pricing and offers. I was actually just on another call with another team leader right before I got here, and he said, "I think buyers have this feeling that they can write, $50K or $100K under asking because it's a buyer's market now, and sellers still want to list for 2019, 20 prices. So we're in this weird pricing expectation, and people aren't seeing offers until they do a couple price reductions. So my prediction for 2024 is the pricing leveling out to a place where it should be within a range, and buyers starting to write offers that are 2 to 3 to 4 to 5% under asking, and people willing to do deals with them. I think that hasn't been the case since COVID and pre-COVID. That has really driven the real estate market wild because sellers just got unrealistic expectations of what their house is worth.
Sure. Yeah, I know that we're going to be watching these rates go down, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out as these rates decline. Is that going to pick up buyer activity? And as a buyer, where do you want to jump in and start doing the tango? Do you want to wait till rates are all the way down here and then all the buyers are back? Or do you want to maybe find some sweet spot in the middle to jump back into the game?
Yeah, I think that's personality driven too, because you got your pessimists and you got your optimists. And I think you probably deal with this every day. You got the people who you call that said 2 or 3 years ago they were going to wait till prices came down to write offers. And then you have the same people right now telling you that they're not going to write any offers until interest rates come down. So there's never going to be a perfect time to buy and sell at the same time. So I think if you're a first-time home buyer, that American dream is still going to happen, and people are going to buy in any type of market. Just may not be the quantity or volume that you used to have. But yeah, that's kind of how I unpack that for 2024.
Yeah, totally. So as we mentioned, it's the new year, and so many folks have real estate goals this year, whether it's to start an Airbnb or to add an ADU or an additional dwelling unit or purchase their first rental property. So I wanted to take some time to review investment strategies with you. I know this is a big part of your business, so I think you're the perfect guest to bring on for this. But one of the main things that I have been hearing from investors looking for rental properties is nothing pencils right now with the new rates. And I know you have your own take on this, but has that been your experience as well?
I, I think where that comment is derived is because you're seeing investors across the country be louder and louder with their opinions and commentary, right? So when you're in a market where sale price, acquisition price is so low and rents are relatively high or comparative to the West Coast, those markets are going to be cash flow markets, and those have the loudest investors that are saying, nothing pencils on the West Coast. The tenant laws are horrible, and why would I buy something that the break even point is 20 years from now? But I think there was a YouTube video I did that was in response to a bunch of people that were using the I only invest in red states, and I want to touch base on that because this is going to get to exactly what you're asking. And there is incredible wealth and opportunity in any state, depending on whatever the market's doing, right? We have a lot of population movement, a lot of people that are coming and going from different markets, especially with COVID. COVID changed the entire velocity of the entire real estate market for the entire country and the world. Mobile or remote working and all of those different components that you couldn't build that yourself or expect it. And on the West Coast, I think your strategy for investment has to be more long term. You have to be a great asset manager. You have to be a great landlord. You have to be a great uh, pro forma focused investor, which means you're not just looking to turn a fix and flip or buy a rental and then sell it immediately in a year and make quick cash flow. There's still amazing opportunities here, but this is an appreciation driven market. And that's what I learned. I'm originally from Ohio, so I've been in both markets. But my time in California that I spent in the Silicon Valley is I was taught that this is a park your money, and you will make 2x, 3x, 4x returns than any Midwest market, but you have to be patient. And I think the patience, if you pull everything out of that entire question, the more patient investor who's willing to wait for the right opportunity is this is a market in which you can make $250,000 in appreciation in 5 years. You can't. I think my parents' house they bought for 50, 60,000 bucks, and I think it's worth 120, 30 or 40 years later in the Midwest. That same house here is 4 or 500,000. So it's just a different strategy. You got to be very, very keen on what you're doing and when you're doing it. And yes, up front, some things may not pencil. I've built in most of my portfolio on negative and bad cash flowing assets and repositioning them. And I think that's given us the incredible opportunity to know how to take a fix and flip strategy and turn it into a buy and hold strategy of, hey, like I'll buy this property. It's negative $200, $300 a month. We'll figure out the tenant situation. We'll figure out the deferred maintenance situation. We'll make happy tenants. We'll make the right upgrades, and we'll invest a lot of money in making sure that if we need to sell, we have a good asset that has no deferred maintenance, good upside, and good financials. And I think there's just so many investors out there that don't understand that. We experience them every week. I have a rental property. It's just not doing well. And it's like, when's the last time you looked at the numbers? Do you even know the numbers? So I think that's been a big part of our strategy is understanding that the West Coast market, because we're investing in many different markets, but this market especially is a park your money, be patient, and ultimately look at things in the 5 to 7 year cycle versus the 2 to 3.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. You recently did a webinar on how to revitalize your rentals and increase your earnings by 10%. Do you want to drop any of the cliff notes on that conversation into ours or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think property management, asset management, if you're not familiar with, do a Google search of both. I think asset management, I came from running many different departments of investments, but the most important job that I ever had that I think made the most impact is we started managing a fund of other investors' money, and I was in charge of making the decisions, right? Who we hired as a property manager. Let's start there. What we did in terms of rent increases, what we did when we got a repair call, what we did in terms of capital improvements like roofs and turnover and just taking care of properties and curb appeal. And then when I went to go work in syndications and working with investment apartment complexes that were at 10x that capacity of just a small portfolio, now you got 300-400 unit properties, is that asset management gets completely just forgotten by the average landlord, the small mom and pop. They don't even know what it means. And I think that's what Revitalizing Your Rentals webinar was all about is, hey, it's time to take your landlord hat off and be an asset manager. Let's look at the profit and loss statement. Let's look at our tenant health. Let's look at, if we're having issues, where are we right now, and setting a benchmark, and then how do we set goals to constantly improve not only the performance from a financial standpoint, but also the environment and the experience that your tenant is having. A lot of people, are talking investments. They're always, pro landlord. And I like to look at myself as pro tenant and pro landlord, because if I have a happy tenant who takes care of my property and calls me when there's something wrong instead of forgets about it or tries to, broom it under the rug, I have a tenant that's looking after my asset. And so we really take care of our tenants, but we also want to teach good financial acumen, business acumen when it comes to rental properties. And I think that's the quickest way to get to a retirement that could be just based upon a few properties that you acquired over 20 to 30 years, right? And I just want to say one last thing on that note is that I don't know how many times as a real estate broker, you've probably heard this, is that the seller that you go to meet with is so concerned about the net to seller analysis that you're giving them. Well, what's my bottom line? Because the only asset they own is the home that they live in. And they're making such an emotional decision to sell that home. Well, that same decision is because that home is their retirement account. And that's why I try to tell everybody, like, when you buy your first home, it is an investment property. It is not just your house that you live in, you pay a mortgage payment, and you choose to mow the lawn. And Revitalizing Your Rentals was trying to educate people that whether you're a homeowner or whether you're a small-time landlord or whether you're somebody that owns a huge portfolio, you have to look at it like a business, because it's just like your checking account. It's just like your IRA. It's just like your 401k at your job. And I think truly that if more people were educated at a younger age, I wish they taught real estate investments in high school, because I would probably own 4 times as many properties. So that's my kind of take on what we're always pushing value and trying to educate people so that they just make sound decisions. So I'm not sitting across the table at you at 67 years old and you're yelling at me because you can't squeeze out another $20,000 on your 3-bedroom, 1-bath house in Springfield.
Yeah, it's definitely all about knowing your numbers and running them efficiently. I listened to that whole webinar, so it's very educational. Thanks for putting that on for everyone.
Appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, of course. In my opinion, almost any property pencils if you use it as a short-term rental. But a lot of investors are hesitant to add the responsibility of managing a calendar and purchasing furniture that you need to run a short-term rental. What are your personal thoughts on short to mid-term rentals, and what would you say to those folks that are on the fence?
So I have more experience in the mid-term rental space, but I have probably a handful of clients that just crush it on the short-term rental stuff. And that is one of my goals for 2024. I want to purchase my first short-term rental. And I think the reason me and my business partner kind of stayed away from it is that it was kind of the new thing, the hype that everybody was driving on over the last couple of years. And we went into the mobile home park or manufactured home park space, and that consumed a lot of our time and resources and capital. But the short-term rental game is the best way to get a return on investment as quick as possible, as you have stated, But I think with short-term rentals, I think the craziest opportunity is if you can start to build a portfolio of short-term rentals, you now have your next vacation planned. And that's what we've seen a lot of our wealthier investors, our liquid investors, they were starting to buy short-term rentals in all these places that they like to visit. And they would utilize it for a month or two, just like a timeshare. And then the other 8 or 9, 10 months of the year, they're just stacking bookings and setting it up in an efficient manner that's going to not only pay their mortgage down, it's the smartest way to get to your break even point, to be cash flowing. I want to say 3x a normal short term or a normal buy and hold long term rental. So my experience has been to really dig into the cash on cash return, um, the furnishing cost, the down payment, the closing costs, and what does it actually take in terms of capital to get a short-term rental up and running, and then what is that 0 to 6 months, 6 months to 12 months review capture velocity. I think short-term rentals, the biggest problem is people want to buy them, they get excited about it, but they either suck at providing a client experience that's going to lead to great reviews, or they suck at getting reviews. And when they suck at leaving reviews, or they just, what's the best word to use? They neglect the importance of hospitality marketing. That's where you get the short-term rental failures. And we've had a bunch of those as well. We've sold short-term rentals that just didn't have the right operator. So if you can really study hospitality, you can go stay in short-term rentals and look at a good one, look at a bad one, look at the marketing, the photography, the review capture, the amenities, the experience in terms of the host communication. You put all of those things in a blender and you try to create that experience. And so I was just meeting with a gal a few days ago for coffee, and she has bought 3 short-term rentals in the Springfield market over the last couple of years, and she's doing great. She actually replaced her 9 to 5 income, but to put bookends on this short-term rental piece, it was amazing to hear that she had done exactly what I had done, which was, if I was going to get into any type of investment, I wanted to go feel it, live it, see it, do it. And I told her, I was like, I want to buy my first short-term rental this year, but I'm going to go book like one every other month in all these different locations. And I'm going to write down all the pros and cons and the cobwebs in the corner and the smelly bathrooms and the heat that doesn't work. And I'm going to put together a plan of how do I make sure that never happens to my guests.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the biggest thing, if you want to get into short-term rentals, from my opinion, even though I don't own any, is you have to look at the experience that your guest is having and being able to capture that in written form.
Right. Yeah. The reviews is definitely a big section of that. I've been running a short to midterm rental in my backyard because I have an ADU, and it's only about 500 square feet. It's an open studio with a bathroom, and it's got a kitchen and everything, and it pays a little over half my mortgage.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm kind of close to the university, so that certainly helps. But I've actually taken my listing off of Airbnb, off of VRBO, and off of Booking.com, and I'm just doing furnished finders right now. You find nurses that will stay there for 3 to 6 months, pay that Airbnb like expense, but they're going to be there. You know, all the cleaning supplies are in there, and I'm not actually looking at people jumping in and out every weekend and having to clean everything out. So it's been a really great experience.
Yeah, I think the proximity to attractions, the ocean, a city, a university, those are all going to be driving factors for short-term rentals. And that has been my biggest hesitancy, is that like I like to invest locally, and but I was like, if I want to buy a short-term rental, where, the location question, it was the whole hesitancy to getting into it. I didn't know where to buy it
Hmm.
because I didn't want to be selfish in buying it just where I want to go ski, or take my wife and my kids for the summer vacation. And so I think naturally doing it in your own backyard is probably the best place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty low risk as far as I was concerned because I already own the house. I'm already paying the mortgage. And if I can have this benefit, that's great, which obviously kind of leads me into another conversation I wanted to have with you. You know, a lot of these short term rentals are in ADUs, and the city has recently eased a lot of restrictions around building ADUs in your backyard and on your property. And so a lot of people have recently kind of started talking more about putting these ADUs in their backyard. Would you mind kind of walking us through that process and what type of expenses might be associated with that and what they need to prepare themselves for?
Yeah, that's I've had several investors come to me, execute the plan. I've had some people who are just friends that have a house, right, like you, that have put an ADU in their tiny home. And I'm actually going to be doing a webinar in the next 6 to 8 weeks with a tiny home manufacturer out of Portland on this topic. But um, let's talk about the buy box of a property that first, if you're looking to buy a house and potentially put an ADU in, I think that's where I would start, both in Eugene and Springfield within city limits. The ADU game is set forth by the planning department, both Eugene and city of Springfield, and they already have pre-developed plans that you can basically walk in and say, "Hey, show me what you got. Let me go to your website. Let's see these plans that you already have." It becomes a super easy for a general contractor to be able to bid it out, create a takeoff list, get all the necessary permits, and the buy box to that is okay. The city is making it as easy to come up with the design, the design, the engineering, the architecture aspect of it. That used to be just a hodgepodge of different things. You'd have to find a builder that knows how to build a tiny home or some sort of studio, and hope they actually know how to pour a foundation and do all of the necessary components. But now you have a city or cities that are giving you, hey, here's what we have. It's already pre-approved. We can get them through planning quickly, but where do we put them, right? And so I have been always telling everybody to look at the lot size of 6,000 to 9,000 square feet. Anything smaller than that, it's possible, but it's hard to follow setback rules, right? It's hard to create egress, ingress in terms of where do people park or how do they get to the backyard? Is it just a path that they squeeze through a gate, or can they actually park their car on the right side or left side of your house, or can they drive their car to your backyard? So I'm always looking for clearance that can fit a car between the house, the exterior walls of the house, and the fence line. I'm always looking for properties that follow that square footage range. I'm always looking for properties that are easier to get utilities to versus like an entire backyard that has a swimming pool or, a gigantic concrete pad that we're gonna have to start, either doing concrete cutting or jackhammering things out. But getting water, getting waste, getting electric service, getting gas service if you're going to be putting that stuff in. So utilities, setbacks, access, and also I call it the feng shui, which is the worst word to use, but the design aspect of it in terms of does it complement your house? I see a lot of ADUs that like you got this either a beautiful house and then like a horrible mismatch of why would you build that in your backyard, right? The aesthetics, right? And so I'm always looking at, do you look at your house and look at your ADU and do they live in harmony? And I think that's the best way of looking at real estate in terms of the resale value of a house with an ADU. So the aesthetics that I'm always looking for is I like ADUs that match the house, both in color scheme and material choices. So if you're going to put hardy plank on the house, put hardy plank on the studio. And if you're going to do complete ground up construction, make sure that they have some sort of ability to be resold together and not feel like there's two houses on one lot. Also in that is making sure that there's an outdoor living space that is an extension of that tiny home or that ADU. I think that's super important. I used to work in design, build, construction. I used to work in landscape architecture, and I used to tell people like the more you can create an experience when the weather is good that people can be outside or they can be barbecuing or going to a hot tub or whatever you can do. Now that 5, 6, 700 square foot property doesn't seem so small. And so I think design, planning, the element of cohesiveness with the primary residence and following those rules. Now, when you take that same theory of everything I just talked about and you move it out into the rural areas of Lane County, rural residential zoning allows an ADU within a 100 feet of the primary residence. It has to be on the same infrastructure, which is well and septic. It can't be used for vacation rentals now. I think that the rural planning of what Lane County did, and I hope somebody hears this, they did it wrong. They should encourage short-term rentals on rural properties. That's just only going to spur more commerce for small businesses, for contractors, for anybody coming here to visit, because now you're making it easier for people within city limits to build ADUs, but now you're making it less financially attractive for somebody in the rural residential zonings to actually want to build an ADU because it has to be their grandma living in it or a tenant they don't want to see every week.
Right.
So
What type of financial commitment do you think you'd be looking at by taking on an ADU project, and what kind of timeline after you get all your permits squared away with the city?
timeline, I try to tell everybody you can go from 0 to 6 months with an ADU and make some good progress in terms of planning and getting things in motion and almost completed. If you have a good contractor, I've seen it take up to a year in a new construction type phase where most of the effort and focus has been to get the house up and running and getting that certificate of occupancy. In terms of financials, you used to be able to build a house here for $125 to $150 a square foot. Now with material pricing and permitting and land costs and all of that stacked up, I mean, 225 to 250 a square foot is pretty much common number even in the resale of real estate. But with an ADU, like 1,000 square foot ADU, even most are under that.
Right.
You can. It depends. If you go prefab and build like a tiny home that is shipped in, you're talking on the low end 65,000, 70,000 with most of the stuff. It might not be all of the stuff, but I would say a rough number to start is $75,000.
Yeah. So if you're doing this for an investment purpose, you're probably looking at 5 to 6 years before you're actually seeing a return on that investment.
Yep.
Yeah.
For some of the more dialed ADUs that may have all the bells and whistles and things, I actually was going to build one above a garage, and the contractor told me about 150 to 175,000 was like a, a, a good garage with 1,000 square foot ADU on top. If you remove the garage, it can probably do it for about 115 to 120,000. And that's all in permits, infrastructure, foundation, well, septic, everything in terms of being tied into the current system.
Okay. Yeah, that's not too bad. Whenever I had Amanda Beaumark on, obviously she was really concerned about some of the new landlord tenant laws that are getting put into effect. With the investors you work with, are they as concerned as she was, or is anybody that looking to pivot with a short or midterm rental with their existing rentals, or just getting out and going to Springfield?
We've seen both. We've seen, I'm on the board for the Rental Owners Association, and we've seen a lot of movement from the aging in place, like the older landlords that are, mid 80s. They're ready to cash out. Their kids don't want to be landlords. They've been self-managed. So kind of couple categories to unpack real quick. You got your self-managed older landlord. They may be tired or they may not be tired. They may have made a lot of money or some money. But we've seen a lot of rental properties being owned by trusts, from estate sales, probate that's happening. So we're seeing a lot of people who are the majority of these rental properties were bought in the 80s and 90s. And now we're seeing those landlords in the Eugene market starting to slowly trickle out their low performers. And then, you're starting to see portfolios starting to sell a couple duplexes, and you start seeing the same name. But yeah, you're seeing in Eugene, we're seeing a lot of duplexes being sold. You're not seeing a lot of 3 or 4 units or bigger complexes, just still because the university's here. But phase 2 rental protections have changed the landlord who's been operating here for 20 or 30 years. Now you're telling them that they can't do this or can't do that, or if they need to do a remodel, they have to pay 2 months rent, and you're going to create this layer of registration and monitoring that in some cases is great. It's what the slumlords need to get cleaned up and kicked out, right? But on the flip side, you have very conservative landlords who do not want to be told what to do, and I think that's who we're seeing selling. But the investors, I always say this. I say, in a state in which a landlord is not favored, the investor needs to be more savvy. They need to understand the law. They need to understand what to do when they have a vacancy, right? Don't miss your opportunity to remodel the unit. Don't miss your opportunity to make every ounce of opportunity to make as much money on that property. But we see $800 to $900 rents in a market where rents are $1,800 to $2,200 on average, and people don't monitor those rental rates. And so a tenant comes in, they stay there for 10, 15, 20 years. They're just paying off their mortgage. And then there's this aha moment that happens, because as soon as the laws start changing, they start saying, well, how much money am I really making off this? And is it worth for me to keep these properties? And that's what we're seeing right now. So, but to the investors coming into the market, there's an incredible opportunity. You have less competition. There's less landlords. There's less out-of-state investors that want to buy here because they hear about all the bad. So I take advantage of it, and in a way in which I know I'm not really planning on selling them for a while. So
Sure. Well, I know that you're an investor as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you what your favorite investment strategy heading into the new year is.
Burr.
All right, let's talk about Burr.
Yeah, Burr strategy, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat over and over and over again. There's a gentleman named Nate Barger in Cincinnati, Ohio. He owns the Burr Facebook group. I think there's over 250,000 members in there. And I think years back, when I just started getting into the Burr strategy, I was following what Nate was doing. I think he only had like 3,000 Instagram followers. Now he's up to like 30 or 40 or 50,000. And it came back to, I was working construction. So I was like, how could I mix remodeling properties with understanding financing and cash out refis and appraisals after completion of projects, and mix a strategy in which I can buy a tired asset, beautify the neighborhood, improve the tenancy, and then be able to pull my money out and rinse and repeat and do it over and over again. And that's me and my business partner have successfully, just in Oregon, we have about $3.5 million in rentals that were all bird. That's all we did. And then out of state, that whole entire Burr strategy allowed us to kind of operate in 2 methods. One of which is we can fix and flip properties. And if the exit is going to be a good retail profit, then that's what we're going to do. But just in case that price or that exit strategy goes wrong, we can then call our DSCR, debt service coverage ratio lender, and then put a tenant in it and hold on to it for 1 to 2 years and refi out of that hard money if we're going to be buying with hard money. And there's 2 exit strategies. And I think that Burr strategy has allowed us to be able to operate a flip business with more aggressiveness. Like just today, I ran another offer, and I only wrote it. It was 160. I think it was 160,000. I wrote it 155. And my agent's like, "Oh, most of my investors are writing at like 145." I'm like, it pencils for what I can do. I can get it accepted quicker. It's more predictable. But if I need to, I can burr it, put a tenant in it, and I'm still going to cash flow $300 or $400 a month. So the burr strategy allows me to have multiple exit strategies, and it allows me to build a portfolio out of state with more velocity. And I think that's it's harder to do in Oregon, but a lot of the acquisition that we're doing that's burr strategy here is we're buying on short-term financing or owner financing. And then when that balloon's about to come up, I've already built enough equity. I've already remodeled the units. I've already increased the rents. And we actually went to dinner with one of the first sellers that ever sold us some owner financing properties. And I laid out a folder and I said, look, I said, you guys were so hesitant in selling us properties on owner financing, but you've been able to retire. You've been able to remove yourself from being landlords, and they were having the worst time. They had bad tenants. They were constantly getting calls on the weekends. They would leave for the weekend to go, take their RV for a camping trip, and then they're getting blown up about this and that. And we've allowed you to retire, get monthly cash flow every day or every month in your mailbox. And I've increased the value of the properties that you've sold us by $1.3 million. And they said, can we invest with you? And that was a big turning point where we had taken an initial investor and turned them into a long-term investor for out-of-state fund. So yeah, I just want to share with everybody is like burr strategy, understanding financing, and understanding how to reposition properties is the most important skill as a real estate investor.
Yeah, I think that this market is taking a lot of people that might have started as fixers or fix and flips or flippers and turned them into investors because they only had one exit strategy, remodel and get out. So this seems like another way you could kind of, if this isn't the right market to sell, you could pivot into a burr strategy. What would you say to those fixers out there or the guys that are flipping houses and not really happy with the market? Would you tell them to wait, or would you tell them to pivot into this strategy? Or
raise capital, raise money. The reason that they're stuck with only one exit strategy, they haven't raised enough money in order to hold properties.
right.
And I think the most important skill that you can grow a really good house flipper is really good at construction. They're really good at project management. They're really good at underwriting deals. They're really good at getting it closed and getting resold. But it becomes a hamster wheel cycle in which you always have to have inventory. Why wouldn't you raise capital and start for every 4 deals you do, stick one in a portfolio that's making you $500 a month? Next thing you know is you can take on another project, even with hard money, and you have 4 rentals that are paying you $500 a month. That's your $2,000 a month hard money loan payment. So now your 4 rentals are paying for your next flip project. And it was funny because when we started investing out of state, the hard money lender that we were using, he's like, are you guys going to be buying with cash, or do you just need the money for acquisition? Do you need it for repairs? And I told him, I was like, hey, we have a group of investors that have liquid. I'm using you to be able to do 2 or 3 projects at a time, but we have enough money in our buy and hold portfolio that I can literally pay your hard money lender payment or hard money payments. I could buy 3 properties with your hard money loans, and I would never have to tap into any personal assets because all of my rental properties, I could just suck up all the cash and pay them. They're financing my flips. And so that's why I tell everybody it's super important to raise capital, partner with the right people, and all my hard money folks are going to get mad, but how quickly can you stop using hard money? And so when you create a strategy as a flipper to say, hey, in 2024, I want to flip 8 homes, you should at least be holding 2 of those. If you can hold at least 2 of those each year for 10 years, you got 10 rentals. I mean, that's a significant portfolio over time. That's millions of dollars when you want to retire. But we got started in advising and helping investors because I was working for an investor in California, had done over 150, 160 flips in 2 years. and he was holding the good ones. He was turning and converting those into short-term rentals and diversifying his portfolio. And he told me, he goes, the more you advise as a real estate broker to investors, you need to teach them as quickly as possible to stop being reliant on hard money and start holding a property here and there that makes sense, because the more solvent they are, the more they're going to come back to you and pay you commissions. If you just find them projects and they fix and flip and make their $20,000 that they need to pay their, pay their kids tuition and pay their bills and their truck payment, they're just going to be a commission check here and there, but they're never going to be solvent enough to get to a point where you can find 2 or 3 of those investors, teach them how to be a smart house flipper investor, and they'll use you for it. They'll use you to buy and hold properties. They'll use you to flip, but that constantly will build. You could literally build a real estate business with 5 investors that all do 5 deals with you. That's 25 transactions. That's more than 80% of the people in the RMLS, right?
Right.
So that's what I really try to teach everybody is, BRRRR strategy, finding and raising capital, and replacing the hard money lenders is pivotal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that it might hurt some people's feelings, but getting away from hard money is definitely every flipper's goal. Well, Dan, that's kind of the time I had allotted on all my questions. You were a wealth of knowledge per usual. Is there anything else you want to add before I get your social media information?
Just want to share with anybody out there, if you're interested in real estate investments, if you're interested in real estate, I think there's this big divide. I want to talk about the divide just for like 30 seconds here.
Go for it.
There's this big divide where I came from being a real estate investor first, and investors hate agents and agents hate investors because they waste their time. And there's been this friction between the two groups, even though they do work with each other, even though there's a lot of circumventing and people, going around their buyer's agent and talking directly. The best relationships that can happen is a mutual beneficial relationship that's going to be based on trust, communication, and working together and understanding what they're trying to accomplish. And that's what I try to tell any real estate investor. If you've never had a real estate broker's license, that's okay. Any real estate agent that has a license and you haven't invested, that's okay. But as those two communities, they need to come together to help each other and stop using, like, I only buy properties off market. I would never use a real estate agent. The majority of the most wealthiest real estate investors I know were all real estate brokers or mortgage brokers at one time. And there's real estate agents and investors that I know that fail every day, right? But I just wanted to say to everybody, like, my goal is to bring those two communities together and make sure that they share resources, they respect each other, and at the end of the day, they're getting the service and also the product that they need on the market.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. I work with a handful of investors, but the properties that really pencil that are out there, either off market or on market, are so few and far between. In Eugene, I think I'd be hard pressed to have 5 on my hands that I was making happy. But yeah, that's great advice. All right. Well, if somebody wants to look up that webinar I was talking about, where's the best place to find it?
Yeah. So Investing in Oregon is our YouTube channel. You can look that up. We have over 10,000 subs there. Oregon Real Estate Expert on Instagram, over 27,000 followers there. The Operative Group, www. I can't even say it anymore. Theoperativegroup.com is our website for our real estate team. And yeah, just stay tuned. I'm usually dropping those webinars at least every 4 weeks. And any way I can help anybody out there, just reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. You've even been a help to me. I've even considered joining your team. So that's how much information you're going to get from Dan Gandee. Yeah. All right. Well, that's our show this month. I'd like to thank Dan for being on today.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank our sponsor, House to Home Construction. And I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Next month, we have Nadine Scott talking about the McKenzie River Valley Market. Good night, and we'll see you next time.
If you have a question for the show, feel free to email us at eugenerealestatepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to work with Vince Casey as a buyer or seller, please email him at vincecaseyrealestate@gmail.com. Be sure to mention this podcast with House to Home Construction to receive up to $500 off any roof bid from a competitor in writing.